So that does not, that one does not surprise me in the least. What? Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey and we're about to get very, very nerdy with some favorites of all time. Or are they? So I was having a little brainstorm session, if you will, of like what kinds of videos I wanted to do for the next few months or so. And I realized that I've never actually done like a real favorites video, but that's not true. Like, I haven't done one in a long, long time. The favorites video that I've done, not necessarily like, these are my favorites of this genre or this genre, but like just generally favorites of all time, was my second ever YouTube video. So I thought, what a great idea would be to look back and see if those are still my favorite books, because I have had a drastic shift in what kinds of books I like to read. So I'm super curious. There's a couple of them I know for a fact that are going to be on there that are still accurate because they're like classics. But beyond that, I don't know what's going to be on this list. So I thought we could have a perusal together. I've got my iPad here. But I'll leave it linked down below if you'd like to be able to check out the entire video. I'm not going to be doing like that here today, but I will have a little reaction, if you will. And I am a lot bit nervous because, first off, the film quality is going to be so bad. So let's have a little a look-see, and where's the volume? And see if I'm at all close still. I'm so nervous. Oh my gosh, this just... So, oh my gosh. So this was the first time I filmed on my phone, because like the very first video I did was on my laptop. And remember that time when I literally had one bookshelf? That was cute. So please ignore the fact that I for sure have, this is an awful video, but I definitely still have that shirt and that scarf. And those earrings. That's fun. Anyway, let's begin, shall we?
Hello everybody, my name is Kelsey. We're about to get very, very nerdy.
Ooh.
With my favorites.
Wow, I didn't know how to be me yet. So that's fun.
Today I figured I'd show you guys a little bit
Remember
more
that old
into
intro
who
too?
I am by showing you some of my favorite books of all time. Now I just got home from work and it's like 14 degrees outside, so this is gonna be fun. I'm probably gonna forget something on this list, but this is the majority of my favorites. Let's get going. So the first book...
Sorry, I just have to comment. I was so awkward. Like, I'm an awkward individual as it is, but like, I feel like I've come into my own at this point, and I didn't know what I was doing here. Although, at the time, having a favorites as a second video to let people know who I am, not a terrible idea. Still stand by that.
On this list is Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I know I've said...
Okay, so that's not a surprise, I feel like, because that was one of the ones that I thought for sure was going to be on this list. So yes, that one is still true. You guys know I'm a huge Jane Austen fan. Although I will say now I'm torn as to what my favorite book is by her, because for a while now it's been a tie between Pride and Prejudice and Persuasion. So I still think those are a tie right now. So I don't think I'd have like a specific favorite, but Pride and Prejudice is definitely still on there. As you guys know, I have many books that are based on Jane Austen. So that one does not surprise me in the least, and I expected it to be on there for sure.
Before that I love all of Jane Austen's novels, which I do, but if I had to choose one, I'd probably choose this one. Not just because it's her most popular, but because it's the one that got me into reading Jane Austen. Though I will say my favorite passage by Jane Austen is not in Pride and Prejudice. It is in Persuasion. It's the letter from Captain Wentworth to Anne. I just
still very
literally swoon every time I read it. It's just great. The next in my list of favorites is Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury.
So yes, I would say that Fahrenheit 451, though I haven't read it in quite a while, I would still consider that a favorite. That's probably worth a reread here soon. Because I read that when I was in 7th grade, and it was one of the first books. Like, we didn't have a whole lot at that point. I hadn't had many classes where there was like required reading like that, where we read a bigger book that wasn't just like a passage from something or like a short story. So at that point, it was one of my first, but that year we had a lot of good ones. We had Fahrenheit 451. We did, I believe it was Macbeth. I believe it was Macbeth. I always get Macbeth and Hamlet confused. I believe it was Macbeth. And then we also did To Kill a Mockingbird, and I loved all three of those. But this was the first book I think I read that was about books, and I just loved that. Even though it's about book burning, which is not necessarily a fun thing, it was my first step into books about books. It was my first step into books that were kind of like dystopian in a sense. So it's probably worth the reread, because I'm sure there's a lot of like social and political commentary that I definitely didn't pick up on at the time. But I'd say that's still a favorite. I honestly forgot about that book. That's fun.
I don't know what it is about this book that really drew me into it, considering it's about a firefighter who burns books, and the thought of hurting a book almost physically pains me. There's just something I think about his storytelling, and just, it was probably the first
so dramatic
different world that I'd really read. Most books I read at this time were something that could be set in this time frame. It could be something that could actually have happened. The next book in my list of favorites is Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte.
So this one I did also know expected to be on this one. And I would say this one is not a favorite anymore, because I have since read it. I hadn't read it at this point. Let's just start there. I hadn't even read it at this point. I just loved the story. And I think it's safe to say that I love the story of Jane Eyre, but I hate the actual book because the writing is so boring to me. So like any kind of adaptations of Jane Eyre, whether it's like a movie, a play, something based on Jane Eyre, like another reimagining, things like that, I think I would really love, because I love the story of Jane Eyre. I think it's really interesting. But there's a lot about the writing and the physical book that does not work for me. So if I was going by favorite books, I would not keep this on this list for those reasons. But it's a great story, and I still really enjoyed the story. Super creepy, but great for like that gothic time period if you want like gothic classics. It's a good one, but like just be prepared that you're going to be going through so much boring writing to get to the fun stuff.
I just love this story, probably because it's one of the first big plot twists that I'd ever really read, but I just dropped this book. Also, the copy is just so old. I think I got it at like a yard sale for like 50 cents. Smells like old book. I just think it's gorgeous. What is next? So the next book I have for you is a little bit more contemporary. It is Dreamland by Sarah Dessen.
Okay, so this one was the first book. I read this one in high school. This was the first book where I'd read a book about a tough situation. So this one is about an abusive relationship, and I'd never read anything like that before. So this was definitely the first book where like real world problems had made their way into a book. So I didn't know what to expect, but like this one I think shaped what I realized books could do. Again, I don't think this would be on my favorites at this point, just because I literally read it once and I don't even own this copy anymore. I've read many other things that deal with more harder hitting topics that would probably be better at this point. But I still have like fondness in my heart for this book because it definitely opened up my eyes to some stuff. But I don't think this book specifically would be on a favorites list anymore.
This is just one that I think I found at like Goodwill, and I'd heard about her, but I never really read much from her. So I thought I'd pick
Everything
it up
is so
just to see
foggy
what
and
it was like.
fuzzy.
I think I read it once.
How did you guys deal with me?
I was like, I need something to read. We'll go with this one. And it was so different than what I suspected. It was one of those that I couldn't put down just because I wanted to know what had happened to her. There was just something about this book that I just loved. There's my contemporary. I do actually read them. The next book I have on this list is The House of the Scorpion by Nancy Farmer.
So this one I think would also fit into what I said about Fahrenheit 451. This was the first like real science fiction book that I read. I read this, I believe it was in 8th grade when I read this book. I was part of a book club in 8th grade that my science teacher had started, and it was literally my favorite thing in the world. And we read this book, and it's dark because it's about cloning, and I remember really enjoying it. I'm not sure if we might still own this copy. I'm not sure if I kept it or not. If we do, it would be downstairs. Also probably worth a reread, but I don't think it would be on my favorites of all time. I think there are better sci-fis out there. I think my reading tastes have changed enough that like this story might not be interesting to me anymore. But at the time, again, very similar to Fahrenheit 451, it was the first sci-fi I'd read. It was the first book that, like, really made me think about some stuff. It was very dystopian in that sense as well. And I just really, I just really liked it. I just remember really enjoying it. But I don't think it would be a favorite anymore. I think there are better things that I can put on the list.
No, I don't usually read science fiction, but I was in a book club when I was in middle school, and this was one of the books that we read, and it was just another one that just grabbed me, and I couldn't put it down. 9 times out of 10, I was usually never up to reading as much as everybody else was. I could never get to the checkpoints fast enough. I'm just a slow reader to begin with. But for this one, I pretty sure I read beyond what we were supposed to. I just kept reading and kept reading and kept reading. And then the next thing I knew was at the end of it, this one, for some reason, freaking love this one. So the next book on my favorites list is A Room with a View by E.M. Forster.
Okay, this one I think similar to Jane Eyre. Love the story, but I did not really enjoy it when I read it. I just really liked the story of A Room with a View. It's a good movie. I enjoy the movie more than the actual book. It's a good one if you want those Jane Austen kind of vibes, classic kind of vibes. But I honestly haven't thought about this book in literal years. Do we still have it? I'm not even sure if we still have the copy. We probably do somewhere. But yeah, I think I've moved on. Like, it was a good book, I think. I like the story. I like the story, but I didn't really like the writing. It was just kind of boring.
This one I actually will admit that I watched the movie first. I never really heard of this book until we watched the movie. My parents were like, you would actually really like this. And I did. It's got the main character is, oh my gosh, what's her name? Oh, the main actress is Helena Bonham Carter, and Maggie Smith is in it, and there's a ton more names.
Baby Maggie Smith is in it.
Now. It's set in Edwardian England. The next book I have for you is The American Heiress by Daisy Goodwin.
Okay, so this one I think also would no longer be on this list. It was a good book, but again, I've read such better things at that point, and this was really my first step into historical fiction, historical romance to an extent. That wasn't a classic. So like I wouldn't consider classics historical fiction or historical romances because like for the time period they were written in, they were contemporary. So I think this was the first time like really reading a like historical romance and enjoying it and being like, oh, that's a subgenre, a genre that I would really enjoy reading from. So it was probably me just being like, oh, I like that, the way that book made me feel. Let me find more. And I hadn't found more at that point. It's a good mystery. And I really like the author, Daisy Goodwin. I read a lot of stuff by her, but again, better things out there. I enjoyed it, but I don't think I hadn't read enough to really have an opinion at that point.
I think this book came at a time where I was in a slump and I had read a lot of books that were okay or not great.
Also
then I picked this one up and it was probably exactly what I needed. It's a fun, you can go through it really, really fast. There's a little bit of mystery, we'll say. The ending. It's a good one. Oh, yes. The next book I have for you is The Queen's Fool by Philippa Gregory.
Okay, I do think this one would still be on there, although I'm not sure it would be this book specifically, but there would be something from the Plantagenet Tudor England series on this. This one, I think I read The American Heiress first, and this one was the first like hardcore historical fiction that dug deep into not Edwardian, but like Tudor England, like that time period, and that was a time period that I was discovering that I liked. So I would say, I think now, having finished almost that entire series, there are definitely better books in the series than The Queen's Fool, specifically. But I do think something from that series would for sure be on this list. I'd have to read The Queen's Fool again, because I want to, because like where I'm at in the series right now, that's what's next. And even though I've technically read that one already, I think it'd be cool to see if it's as much, if I remember as much about it, or if I liked it as much as I think I did. So I could definitely see this being on there because it represents an entire series that like is a big part of my reading.
This one took me, like a year to finish, just because I started it one Christmas and then I went away to college and then I came back and I picked it up again and then I went back to college. It was just, I never had time. But finally I sat down and I finished this and my goodness, it was good. I'm a huge fan. I really like Philippa Gregory. I have all of her Tudor England books. Yes, there's like 17 and I have all of them. I just really enjoyed this book. The next book on my list of favorites is To Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee. Obviously,
I think I kind of talked about this one before. I'm not sure this would be on my favorites of all time list. I think it has a interesting message. I think I'd have to read it again because, again, like I read it when I was in 7th grade. And I think there are definitely some things about this author and like this world that's maybe problematic, but it also might just be like because of the time. I haven't done any research into that or not. But I do remember really kind of being sucked in by this story. And I think it's because it was one of the first books that like really talked about like racism and racial justice and stuff like that. And I never really like thought much about that until that time. I mean, like it was always there, but I don't think it like registered with me for a while. So this one I think I'd have to reread to tell you for sure if it is or isn't on there. I could see reasons for it both being on a favorites list still and not being on a favorites. But again, it's been such a long time since I read it. I think I'd have to reread it to like really know.
So I had seen the movie a couple times, so I knew what the story was about, but there's something about her writing that made it just so much more visual to me. Obviously, I read it a lot and I couldn't put it down when I was. I did read it for class. Every day we had to read X amount of chapters, and I think I just kept going and got really confused in class, but it's fine. It was a good one, and I'm a huge fan. So the next book is kind of, I consider it my guilty pleasure of the list, and that is The Host by Stephanie Meyer.
I will say this one sucked me in 100%. Again, it probably wouldn't be on a favorites list anymore, but I still have no shame in the fact that I really enjoyed this book. I think it was the romance aspects of this. This was definitely, I read this in college, so it was way after the Twilight craze. And I think I'd moved on from Twilight, but I wanted to see what else this author had to offer. And so I ended up reading The Host because I watched the movie and I really enjoyed the movie. And this is the first time, I think, where I watched the movie first and enjoyed the book better. Because 9 times out of 10, if I am watching the movie first before I read the book, I usually enjoy the movie better just because like that was my first interaction with the story and the characters. But this time it was the reverse. I enjoyed the book way more, which as a book nerd is probably something I should not admit to, but I definitely enjoyed the book way more for this specific story, and it just sucked me in, and I think I felt really good about it. I'm not sure it'd be on a favorites list anymore. I think, again, there are better things out there that deserve to be on the favorites of all time, but this was definitely a good book. I wouldn't consider this a guilty pleasure book anymore. I just really enjoyed it when I read it, so yeah, I liked it. I remember liking it a lot.
Was kind of a fan of the Twilight books. My love for them has kind of dwindled over the years, but when she wrote this one, I could not put it down. Loved it. It got to the point where I think it was like 3 o'clock in the morning, and my roommate woke up to me like sitting in my bed crying. This ending breaks you, but like in a good way. To me, it has a very satisfying ending. It's just a very beautiful story, in my personal opinion. So the next book on my list is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern.
So I think, again, I'd have to reread this one, but I think this is a good potential to stay on the list. I remember really enjoying The Night Circus, but also being very confused. I'd never read such a convoluted book before, so I could see this for sure staying on the list. It's a great, like, fall fantasy book as well, but at the time, it just like sucked me in wholeheartedly. And I just love Erin Morgenstern's work. So I think I literally just talked myself into keeping it on the favorites list. So yeah, I would say that's all. I'd keep that on there. I'd keep it on there.
I cannot rave enough about this book. If you have not read this book, please, 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 please pick it up. So the next book that is on my favorites list is a series, but I can't hold them all up, so we're going to go with this one, and that is the Harry Potter series.
So I have many opinions about this at this point. You guys have heard a lot of them. I would still consider this a childhood favorite because it definitely shaped my reading tastes, and I have a lot of good memories attached to the series because of how it was read. My father read it to us every single summer, a different book every summer, out loud to me and my mom, and so like I have really good ties to this. I still enjoy the world itself, but I don't really talk about it much anymore. I'm not sure I'd keep it on a favorites of all time, but I would keep it on a childhood favorites if I was making like that kind of video, because I think like some of the stuff that I don't want to talk about it too much, but like some of the stuff that's come out, or the stuff that's come out about the author, has definitely tainted my enjoyment of the series. I still enjoy it to an extent, but like I don't really talk about it a whole lot anymore. So like it might stay on this list, but I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. I'd keep it on like a childhood favorites, but not like a of all time kind of thing.
The next one on my awesome list here is Before I Go to Sleep by S.J. Watson.
Okay, this is another one that I think it was the very first thriller I'd ever read, and I loved it. I don't think it'd be on a favorites of all time list because I forgot. Oh, I still do have it, don't I? It's over there. Sorry, I literally just saw it. Well, maybe it would stay. Yeah, okay. I'd keep it on there. I just remember having really good feelings towards it. I read it when our power went out. It was like during the Christmas break, our power went out for like a day or so. So like there was no internet, there was no nothing, which of course us book people are totally fine with. And so I like binged like 3 books in like 2 days or something. And this one I binged in like a day, which had never happened to me before. So I liked a lot of elements of this. I liked a lot of the plot twists, which I think at this point are plot twists that you would have expected going in. They're very common things in that kind of story. It's about memory loss, if you don't know. But at the time, I'd never read anything like that, and it was kind of like my first introduction to thrillers and like domestic thrillers and things like that. And I loved the journal aspect of it because like she writes herself a journal to remind herself. Basically, she falls asleep at night and forgets everything and who she is, and so the next day she has to kind of relearn everything, and so she keeps a journal to remind herself who she is. And I loved those aspects of it. I think it was my first introduction to maybe like the multimedia version of books, and I'm not 100% sure on that, but I definitely enjoyed it. So I'd keep it on this list. Yeah, I'd keep it on this list. So that's the list. There were 13-ish. I honestly don't know how many books were on that list. A lot of them I was surprised to see some of them because I'd forgotten about them. I think my reading tastes have drastically changed in the sense of I still like historical fiction, for example. I don't read as much of it, or I've now discovered historical romance, and at that time I really hadn't discovered much of historical romance. And so, or I didn't want to talk about it. I had discovered historical romance, but I never wanted to talk about it publicly because like it was such a taboo thing. And so I think it's interesting to see what stayed and what didn't, because there are definitely some things on there that like I don't expect Pride and Prejudice or anything by Jane Austen to ever leave a favorites list. I always expect there to be at least one Jane Austen book. I could see my favorite book changing based on the time of like where I am in the time of life. So I expect her to be on there. But some other books, like I didn't expect a thriller, honestly. I forgot that I had discovered thrillers that early. And I didn't expect to see so many books that I discovered when I was in middle school. Even though like I know that I love those books, I forgot. Like a lot of the books that I was required to read for school, very few of them I didn't like. There were some, like I had to read David Copperfield, and I was not a fan of that. I had to read, what was that book? The Power of One. It was about a boxing guy. Was not a fan of that one either. But a lot of the books that I read for school, I really enjoyed. So it was really interesting to see those kind of show up. But I hope you enjoyed this look back. Don't worry, we'll do like an actual like updated favorites of all time video probably in the next couple of months or so. I hope you enjoyed this. Please let me know if you know some of like your favorites when you were younger versus now. Have you had some drastic changes in what you have read? I just realized we weren't engaged yet at that point. I just realized I wasn't wearing any of my rings. That's funny. Please let me know what some of your favorites were. Have you read the books that I mentioned in that video? Do you have some favorites? Let me know. I would love to know this. But if you like this video, and I very much hope that you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up and subscribe down below if you'd like to be part of this awesome growing family. I've also got all my social media down there as well as other fun bookish links. Don't forget to check all that out, and I will see you guys in my next video.